And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was then running for Congress, she wasn't elected yet, was making statements on social media about how Israel had killed these 62 protesters at the Gaza fence. Well, when you look at what Hamas was doing, announcing the names of all the martyrs that were killed at the fence, some 80% of them were Hamas members, confirmed Hamas members. So that's not civilians in a protest, because there were civilians protesting in Gaza City and nothing happened to them. The people rushing the fence were Hamas terrorists. They were members of the Hamas terror organization. So when you get the death statistics, you have to look at what the percentages of combatants. Combatants are legitimate targets in war. If you have 1,000 people who are dead and 800 of them are combatants, that's not exactly, the 200 civilians are a tragedy, but that's a tragedy that goes to Hamas's bill, not to Israel's. If it's 1,000 and one of them is a combatant and 999 are civilians, then you have a different discussion.
I know for a fact that Israel has a very strong movie industry. Is it possible to have a documentary made and shown on PBS or BBC, all those networks, so people really know, they can see what actually happened?
I mean, just very quickly, I think that's absolutely going to happen. I'm sure there'll be many documentaries made. I know of private initiatives in addition to whatever the IDF is doing, but now's not the time for that. I mean, Israel's fighting a war, so I think it's going to happen. It takes time, it will happen afterwards.
The purpose is to bring truth, because people are hearing all these horrible things, like the Israelis bombed the hospital, and people still believe that.
Yeah, I think it's coming out, and they've brought all the reporters to see, as Joel said, and it's going to continue to come out. It will continue to propagate.
Yeah, just wondering. I think all of us are just stunned by the amount of anti-Semitism that seems to be like a volcano coming from the universities. And I'm wondering, did the Israeli government anticipate this level of virulent Nazi-like anti-Semitism from these students who are going to be the leaders of our industries and our politics in just a few years? These are the best colleges in the country. And did they anticipate it? And now that they see it, is there anything in the works to counter this, I think, great danger coming?
I mean, I think in Israel they've seen it, but it shouldn't be Israel's responsibility to deal with what's going on in the United States. Look, in the 90s, when the internet was just started, I was looking at YouTube and I'd see a video, I'd scroll down the video, I'd look at the comments. In the 90s, the comments underneath the video were anti-Semitic. Same thing when Yahoo News was just out. You scroll down to the bottom of the article, already a big percentage of the comments were anti-Semitic. I was on U.S. college campuses in 2002, 2003. I was the lead recruiter for the Jewish agency's long-term programs in Israel, 2-month, year-long volunteer programs. Okay, and I was at all the conferences by Hillel, by Israel on Campus Coalition, and this was the beginning of the phenomenon of the Israel Apartheid Week and the beginning of the intimidation on the college campuses. And these organizations said, don't tackle it head on, sidestep it, do positive programming about Israel on the other side, and let's just hope that somehow or another that this phenomenon doesn't get worse. Okay, that was 25 years ago. Okay, so
can I just address? I want to just address your question. There are two answers. One is you're starting to see donors pull out of these institutions. You've seen an Israeli billionaire pull out of the board of Harvard's Kennedy School. The Wexner Foundation pulled its money from Harvard. Donors are abandoning Penn. These universities have enough money to go on without these extra donations. But these donors who are deciding enough is enough are looking for other places to invest. And I don't know all of the colleges that are stepping forward. I do know for a fact that Hillsdale, the conservative college, is stepping forward and making a very serious effort to expand its connections to the Jewish community. And there is going to be an effort there to try to partner with some of these donors who are disillusioned with traditional liberal arts universities. The other thing I'd say is this. I read the Students for Justice in Palestine talking points when they had all those campus rallies. And one of the things they said was, we are excited and thrilled about this attack on Israel, the Zionist entity, or whatever they call it, because we saw them running away. The images of the young people running away at the festival, the music festival, that was the image that they kept in their minds. They didn't want to look at the wounded, they didn't want to look at the blood, the dead. They didn't want to look at that. They wanted to look at the running away. In their minds, the attack was wonderful because they think that this is the beginning of the end for Israel, that all these Jews in Israel basically are going to go back to where they came from, and then they can, quote unquote, free Palestine. That's what they think. That's why the Iranian leader, Khamenei, tweeted that particular video. Of course they're wrong in that, as was said earlier by Norm Coleman, Israelis are flocking to the country. Reservists are coming to Israel. Volunteers are going to Israel. People are asking, like you said earlier, about how can we help? How can we raise money? Within Israel, people are driving into the war zone with food and clothing and supplies. But here's the thing. If your message is, we want the Jews to run away from Israel so we can free Palestine, the worst way to convince Israeli Jews to leave Israel is to make life in New York and London and Los Angeles impossible for Jews. What they have done with this wave of anti-Semitism is they've shown Israelis, actually there is nowhere else to go. Israelis are looking at it with a sense of shock because, and by the way, it's headline news in Israel. They're not ignoring the campuses. This is a very serious issue in Israel. But it also is a wake-up call that there's nowhere else to go. And that is reinforcing Israelis' commitment to dig in and to stand their ground and to fight, because there's no alternative. So these pro-Palestinian kids who think they're so great because they can scare some university administrators into issuing wishy-washy statements, they've achieved the opposite of their objective. They've made sure that Israel is going to fight. And they're watching this and they're saying, look at the future outside of Israel. It's not good. We are staying here. This is it. And we're prepared to go down fighting. The choice they're facing is we can be murdered in our homes or we can die fighting. And that's the choice they've made.
Two questions. Number one, on the West Bank, I understand that there's a lot of Hamas folks. What is the IDF doing to clean them out of the West Bank? And number two, in terms of the Israeli economy, how is life going on for the other 7 or 8 or 8 million Israelis who aren't in the IDF and engaged in the military operation? Is the economy functioning?
Two things. First of all, this West Bank is a construct that was made up by the Jordanians, and in Israel we refer to it as Judea and Samaria. These are the biblical provinces of Israel, and yes, as you correctly mentioned, Hamas is very active there. There are Palestinian Islamic Jihad cells there. There are all these cells that actually affiliate with Fatah that have been very active. We saw the IDF for the first time hit a mosque in Jenin with an F-16. You don't really see that because there was a terror cell inside the mosque that was planning attacks. There have literally been close to 1,000 arrests made inside Judea and Samaria over the last 2.5 weeks or so. And there's definitely the major threat that not only could we see this arena in the south with Gaza and Hamas, not only could we see this arena in the north open up with Hezbollah, but that inside the Israeli population centers in Judea and Samaria, that we could start to see a return to intifada-style violence like we have seen an increase over the last 2 years, and not only in Judea and Samaria, but also in the mixed Arab-Israeli cities, including Jerusalem, where I live, where there's 250,000 Arabs living directly adjacent to the Jewish communities, and also in the mixed cities of Ramah, Lod, Akko, and Haifa, and others, where we saw just 2 years ago that violent riots started. So depending on how this thing moves and how the organizations feel they need to respond, it could be that Israel's not just fighting multi-front on its borders, but also inside the population centers.
We're still on almost an hour. Let's say 3 more questions. Does that sound all right?
Hi. Thank you both for your time. So one of the points that keeps floating around is that 50% of the Palestinians are children, and this is a way to more vulnerable light and gain sympathy for them. How do we respond to this?
The question was about Palestinian children. One of the talking points is that half of the Palestinian population is children. I'm going to answer that by telling you a story. I spoke to an IDF soldier who told me that he has a sister in the United States who's very much on the left. And she put up a Palestinian flag on her Instagram during the whole thing. Okay. And a soldier in the IDF told me he had a sister who put a Palestinian flag up on her social media when the war began. She's far left radical, and he said, she's really hurt my feelings, and I want her to know that she's hurt my feelings. And I said, well, a person who does that is probably not too concerned about your feelings, first of all. Secondly, she is your sister, so you can't really sever that relationship. One day you'll... Hold on. You can't. We have... I'll tell another story about that later if I have time. But I said, what you need to say, and this goes to your point about the children, is if you're really concerned about Palestinian children, I want you to know, I've heard what you've said. Your Palestinian flag, I don't agree with, but you've really made me think about something, which is the importance of the Palestinian children. And I promise you that when I go into Gaza, I'm going to take better care of those Palestinian kids by getting rid of Hamas than the Palestinians do themselves.
If I can, I think it's just really important also when people say that, look at the education. Look what Hamas is teaching these kids to do. Look in the schools, okay, the UNRWA textbooks. The people that are 30 years old in Gaza right now, they grew up in math textbooks where the word problem was, if you have 5 Jews and you kill 3, how many are left? And that's math, okay? We've seen videos of nursery school and kindergarten graduation ceremonies where you have kids in Gaza dressed up as terrorists and are shooting Jews. This is what they're taught. So these children are being held hostage by Hamas, and they're being taught they're being indoctrinated with hatred. And so to Joel's point, I think that if we can rescue them from Hamas, we'll be doing a tremendous service to the Palestinian children.
Israel has said they don't have any intention of reoccupying Gaza, but when this is all said and done and Hamas is defeated, what other options will they have?
I think you're totally right. I don't think it makes a lot of sense right now for Israel to be saying, yes, we're going to be occupying Gaza after this is over. I think they've been very coy with what their plans are, but they've also said that the IDF is going to be in the Gaza Strip for a very long time. And the argument can always be made that the more Israeli control there is over any territory, the better that the Palestinians live in terms of quality of life and safety and security. Where Israel pulled out from the Gaza Strip in 2005, the military's not there, there's no civilian control. You see, Hamas takes over. It looks like Syria, it looks like Lebanon, it's a terror haven. You go to Judea and Samaria, where even in areas A where the IDF is not supposed to go in, they go in on a regular basis. They're constantly mowing the lawn. Whenever a terror entity rises up, they're there to try to contain it and to remove the threat. And certainly in the mixed Arab-Israeli cities, the Arabs live even a higher quality of life because they're able to be monitored and policed. And so the IDF is going to be there for a very, very long time. The question is going to be about municipal control. I think there's a lot of questions as to what happens in this conflict. How many Gazans are left? Will Gazans be able to flee out the Rafah crossing? Depending on all these different issues will depend on if Israel decides to take civilian and administrative control, whether they try to bring in the Palestinian Authority, which would be a disaster. That's what led to Hamas coming in, whether there are going to be efforts to try to get them back into Gaza, or whether some kind of third party or amalgam group of Arabs or international observers could be in there. We don't know. I think it's obviously in Israel's best interest to be present in Gaza and to take responsibility for the entire land, but we have to see what happens.
Assuming that Hamas is defeated, and however you define very, very long time, let's just say they're defeated. How do you see the political landscape in Israel at that time? Where is Likud and the other parties?
It's a very good question. You know, I think it's too early to the question is, you know, let's say Hamas is defeated. What does that do to the political situation in Israel? So first of all, the bitter political situation in Israel over the last several years, including the judicial reform and all the protests, in many ways was one of the contributing factors to this conflict, because there's no doubt that Iran, Hamas, and others saw an inherent weakness in the Israeli society, and they thought, especially with reservists saying they're not going to come fight for the country, warning the IDF generals warning that this could affect the strength of the military, and so this sense of weakness that was projected by Israel, which was horrific and totally unwarranted, probably was a contributing factor to this attack. In terms of Benjamin Netanyahu and his continued rule, it's kind of hard to imagine right now that he's going to survive this. At the same time, the members of his coalition, do they want to go anywhere? No, they're not looking for an election. So the way the parliamentary system works, there's not going to be an election for another 3.5 years from now. And so there's a chance in some way that the government could survive just because the politicians don't want to go anywhere. But the only real way that I think that this government does get over it is with a comprehensive victory. Anything short of that, and I think you're going to have all kind of political chaos in the country afterwards.
I just want to add one thing. I know it was our last question, but what I saw in Israel, and I want to leave you on an optimistic note, what I saw in Israel in terms of leadership, maybe future political leadership, is that there's a younger generation of Israelis, maybe not so young, but there's a new cohort that's emerging in this crisis. These are people who are organizing the volunteer efforts. There are restaurateurs, for example, who've turned their entire kitchens over to preparing meals for people who are stranded. They've even made some of these kitchens kosher if they weren't before, so they can get meals to people who only keep kosher. There are people who are organizing donation drives in former political offices. I walked into the political office of a municipal candidate. They've thrown politics out the window. They just have stacks of boxes for the orphans. Israeli society, despite the divisions, is very strong and very cohesive. Yes, it was weakened by all these divisions, but what you see is a society that is determined to grow. It's a society of people who, despite all of the differences, still love one another, still care deeply about another. There were several thousand ultra-Orthodox men who showed up at IDF recruitment centers who wanted to be drafted into the military when this conflict started. This is obviously it's a point of contention in Israel. Should ultra-Orthodox people be drafted? Well, there are thousands showing up to serve. There is a tide emerging in Israel of people who want to be involved, and they've also realized we don't have to wait for the government to do this. Historically, Israel's been quite a socialist country. Many would describe it as kind of still in some ways a very statist country. The government decides a lot of things. There's been this realization that civil society, that people outside government have incredible power and don't need to wait to be told to do something. So there is this kind of resurgence and revival, and no matter what the political parties are in future, I think it's something that we can all be very optimistic about. And I don't want anyone to leave feeling pessimistic about the future of Israel. I know the news is often bad and the arguments are terrible and the media bias is really irritating, but I tell people, do something positive. Follow JNS. JNS has the best news coverage of Israel. It's got the best opinion.
9 o'clock call in LA.
Go to rallies. Even if go to rallies just to be with other people who need your support. Just get involved because you'll feel better and you will make a difference.
I want to add one more thing. I'm sorry. I just want to say, look, there's a lot of conceptions that led to this moment that are being shattered by what happened. You know, the idea of whether or not Israel had deterrence, by the idea of being able to kick the can down the road until the next time and put that jihad genie back in the bottle for a small period. A lot of the military concepts, a lot of the political concepts are going to be reevaluated in the months ahead, and the entire political system also, I think, is going to be reevaluated in the months ahead. I think that this war, while it's a horrific tragedy, also provides significant opportunities, not just for the Israeli social fabric and the political fabric and the military fabric, but also to change the game in the entire Middle East. If Israel will come out of this on top, and I think there's an amazing opportunity to take out Hamas, I think there's potentially an amazing opportunity to take out Hezbollah. I actually think that there's a possibility here that you may see, because you cannot determine how a war goes. A war is chaotic, and things might develop that people don't want to happen, but you'll see as things move, there might be a possibility to take out the nuclear infrastructure of Iran. I wouldn't rule it out as a possibility. And I think what Paul says is that Israel is strong and will be stronger in the future. Thank you.